Anson Frericks, I think I have his name right. He is the author of a new book called Last Call for Bud Light. He is the Strive Asset Manager co-founder. He is with Vivek Ramaswamy. He has written a great book that I think everybody should read. Anson, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me this morning, Glenn. Really excited to be on the show.
Oh, thank you. Your book is fascinating. It is a great, great business book to kind of just get into how a great brand is built and then how it is dismantled and how it went horribly, horribly wrong.
Yeah. Glenn, I mean, it's really interesting. If you think about all the pushback on ESG and DEI, I mean, really this, in my mind, it really started with the collapse of Bud Light. That's when I think that you had all these regular, everyday folks that were saying, man, yes, I did not like when the NFL had all the players kneeling. Yeah, I hated when Disney got involved in parental rights issues. But, man, when Bud Light, which was the working man's everyday citizen beer, when all of a sudden they're promoting Dylan Mulvaney and everything that goes along with Dylan Mulvaney, that's when I think people actually really said enough's enough. They stopped buying the beer. Customers left by the millions. Stock price cratered, and it's something crazy that they still haven't figured it out, and there hasn't been a comeback at all.
I wrote a book a few years ago about the Great Reset, and how that was changing everything, and all of these companies would be beholden not to you, the consumer, but would be beholden to people like BlackRock. And as I'm reading your book, I'm like, yes. I can't believe how right we were, because that's really what seemed to have happened. The culture changed. You moved from St. Louis to New York. You started caring about BlackRock, not the consumer. And you were there watching this happening, knowing what was coming. At least it seems that you really kind of knew what was coming.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and Glenn, you were ahead of everybody on this with the Great Reset. I mean, phenomenal book on your end. And seeing what was happening when you had the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and all these individuals that were pushing more for this European form of corporate governance, kind of stakeholder capitalism, that companies, they're supposed to create value for all stakeholders, which is very distinct from sort of the American Milton Friedman view of the world that said you have to put the shareholders first and you have to do what's right for the shareholders, which is creating great products, services that actually creates more sustainable businesses. But as many corporations over the last 5 to 10 years adopted this Klaus Schwab European stakeholder view, which was foisted on them by the BlackRocks of the world, who were taking money from very progressive pension funds in California, in New York, and European sovereign wealth funds. I mean, we saw this as the least sustainable thing that a business can do is try and get involved in all these political and social issues to fracture your customer base.
So was
Customers leave, people get fired. I mean, it's bad.
Was that something that you think these business leaders actually believed in? Or were they just saying, hey, it's a new world and everybody has to do this, or we're not going to get the money from the banks and we're not going to get the funding that we need, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think many of these people believed in these programs, but unfortunately they were foisted on them by the BlackRock, State Streets, Vanguards, who are the single largest shareholders in most of these companies. And then you have this whole ESG industrial complex built around this. I mean, McKinsey, one of the most influential management consulting companies, had their Diversity Matters, Diversity Wins, DEI studies that told companies that they needed to improve their DEI. And of course, they could hire McKinsey for millions of dollars to help them figure out how to do that. You had the Human Rights Campaign, which is this activist nonprofit organization starts scoring companies. You talk a lot about the social credit scores. Human Rights Campaign was doing this to companies and shaming them if they didn't have the right transgender policies in place. They didn't have the right amount of advertising to the LGBTQ plus community. I mean, there was this whole complex that was built up, and that's why I think you're starting to see a lot of CEOs now backtrack from these policies because they had nothing to do with actually creating more value for the shareholders or actually furthering the business. It was all about promoting a political agenda that I think most of them didn't want to believe in, but they were most compelled and forced to do over the last couple of years.
So the Bud Light, the end of, I think I agree with you, the end of ESG, at least the end of it being the knee-jerk reaction of like, no, of course we have to, have transgender people in every commercial. The end of that, I'm reading your book last night and I'm like, okay, I think maybe maybe we've hit the end of this. Maybe this is the beginning of looking back and saying, look how insane all of this was. Are we on sure footing now, leaving that time period, or is it still a real lurking danger?
No, I mean, I think the pendulum's definitely swinging back, but I mean, you really see sort of businesses dividing in two camps. You have certain companies that I think have realized that these policies have failed and they want to get back to the bottom line. I mean, you've seen companies like Meta and Walmart and Tractor Supply Company and a bunch of other people that have pulled back their programs. But then you have companies that are more in progressive cities. I mean, Costco has doubled down, and Costco is based out of Seattle. They're doubling down on their DEI programs. You have other companies, and I talk about this a lot, but even Anheuser-Busch, which is owned by a Belgian corporation called InBev, that they haven't necessarily publicly backed down. I mean, this was the company that lost the most from this whole movement, and they still haven't publicly backtracked, even though a lot of their American counterparts have, because again, they're owned by a European company that promotes more of these values. And I think that's where you're starting to see this divide. And the companies that continue to hold on to, I think the DEI and ESG philosophies are going to continue to fall behind their American counterparts.
Yeah, so how much of a role did just being out of step with the Bud Light customer, how much of that played a role before ESG? I mean, if you don't understand the Clydesdales, you don't get Budweiser. Do you agree with that?
You're right. Yeah, 100%. And I think that there was a dangerous cocktail had been mixing for almost 10 years at Anheuser-Busch, and I kind of saw this firsthand. So the quick background is, so Anheuser-Busch, which used to be this great American-owned family by the Bush family, it was taken over by a European company called InBev in 2008. And InBev was based in Belgium, and then it was also run by a couple of Brazilian individuals. And they came here to the U.S., and over 5 years, and they really dismantled a lot of what Anheuser-Busch was, even including in the year 2015, they moved the corporate headquarters from St. Louis, Missouri to New York City. And they thought they couldn't have the right talent in St. Louis. They couldn't attract the right people, even though St. Louis, Missouri, for 150 years, they had great talent and had built this company, essentially the world's largest beer company.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Anheuser-Busch, St. Louis, Missouri. I mean, you heard that your whole life.
That's it. So, they moved sort of the epicenter away from the middle of the country where, I don't know, there's always this saying that says if it plays in Peoria, it generally plays for American. Peoria, Illinois is very close to St. Louis, and you have a whole microcosm of the U.S. around there, which helps you really understand the center of the U.S. Whereas when you move to New York and then you hire New York agencies, New York marketing, New York folks, that has really changed, I think, the outlook of the company. Combine that with the rise of really ESG and DEI, which really took off in that 2015 to 2021, 22 timeframe, made for a dangerous cocktail that they just lost who their customer was and who that sort of like core American beer drinker was.
I have to tell you, I think one of the best parts that has nothing to do with ESG of the book is moving the company to New York, because I moved my company out of New York. But at first, I left the headquarters in New York, and the company really split. Once a founder leaves, things can go awry quickly, and especially if you're in New York and the founder is in Texas. And we really had some really tough times because of that. And I business people, I hope they recognize the effect. But in your book, it shows a company like InBev didn't get that at all.
No, I mean, it really didn't get that at all. I mean, I saw kind of firsthand the company changing in a big way. I mean, do read more about this in the book Last Call for Bud Light. But, one of the big things that I was frustrated with, especially in the 2020, 2021 timeframe, after COVID, after George Floyd, I mean, the company, which was this meritocracy, that's what I joined, was, hey, you work hard, you get promoted. And one of the key principles of the company was we promote based off the results you get. And then all of a sudden that principle was changed to we promote based off of the diversity of your team. And then you started having diversity dashboards that are coming in to see the diversity of your team. And on top of that, we couldn't even get just partnerships done that I thought made tons of sense. I talk about this in the book a lot. I tried to do a distribution agreement with Black Rifle Coffee Company. Yeah. And you probably know Black Rifle Coffee Company. Its mission is to serve, culture and coffee to firefighters, first responders, police, people who love America. But that was too controversial of a partnership in 2021 and early 2022.
That's crazy.
And for me, and it was our kind of external affairs team in New York. They essentially scuttled this deal based off of their own political leanings. I said, guys, the same person drinking a 6-pack of Budweiser at night is the same person drinking, six cups of Black Rifle Coffee Company the next morning. And what do you mean we can't do a distribution deal where we're putting those same Black Rifle coffee cans on the Budweiser trucks? And this makes sense for everybody. But that was too controversial of a partnership. And that's where you saw just that center of gravity when you're looking at America through the lens of Fifth Avenue in New York versus St. Louis, Missouri, where I think you really lose sight of who your customer is.
When you talk about how Bud Light sent that can to Dylan Mulvaney, I mean, that's probably one of the that's may surpass. In fact, I think it does surpass the boob move of we've reinvented our recipe. Now it's the new Coke. I mean, just dumb as a box of rocks. You say you outlined clearly how bad it was for Anheuser-Busch, but the average person, I think, would think that Bud Light has kind of recovered and that's kind of passed, but that's not true.
No, I mean, it really has. And I get into this in the book a lot about that same organization, that same sort of external affairs team that canceled that Black Rifle Coffee deal. They were the one that greenlit the Dylan Mulvaney partnership. And unlike the Coca-Cola, I mean, Coca-Cola, they made a bad marketing mistake. But what did they do? They took accountability for it.
Yeah.
They apologized for it.
Right.
They killed New Coke within, I don't know, a couple of months. And
We're
going back to the whole thing.
Yeah.
One of the big problems is you make bad, boneheaded marketing mistakes, regularly in business. The real problem here is yes, the marketing partnership was wrong, but even more importantly, the company's response to it is the reason, Glenn, sales are still down 40%.
Wow.
50%. The stock has still lost $40 billion of value and has not recovered before this because the company never took a responsibility and accountability and has not made any changes. The same CEO is still there. They still have not come out and then rolled back publicly a lot of their DEI policies. They haven't apologized to their loyal customer base. They called fratting out of touch, and they haven't been able to admit and say, we screwed up. And I think part of that is because of this kind of European ownership that they have. And, my feeling is that they're not actually going to get their Bud Light customers back, no matter how much money they throw at Dana White in the Ultimate Fighting Championship, which I think they gave him $100 million. They have Shane Gillis. They have others. Because the real path to redemption, it goes through forgiveness. And you know this. But the only way to be forgiven is actually to admit there was a mistake and there was an error. And they have yet to do that. And until they do that, I don't think a lot of these customers are coming back, no matter what marketing you give folks.
So what do you see as the current situation and the path forward in the next 3-4 years for American companies and brands?
Yeah, so, it's funny. So I left Anheuser-Busch 1 year before that Dylan Mulvaney partnership.
Good
after
move.
They wouldn't let me do the Black Rifle deal. They wouldn't let me. I saw the company changing from a diversity standpoint. And Vivek and I, we started a company called Strive Asset Management, which was we were going to invest everyday citizens' dollars into businesses and have them be focused once again on meritocracy, have them be focused on their mission. Don't necessarily get involved in a lot of political and social issues. Like we saw, I was living in actually Atlanta, Georgia, if you remember, Glenn, in 2021, when Governor Kemp signed the Georgia Voting Rights Act. He said you need to have an ID to vote. And corporate America lost its mind. BlackRock, one of the very first companies, said we're against this law. We're pushing back on it. Then they kind of compelled Coca-Cola, Delta to get involved in this and push back. And Major League Baseball canceled the All-Star game in 2021 in Atlanta over this Georgia voting rights law. Just you need to have an ID to vote. So we saw a lot of these problems happening, and we came out and we said, we're going to start a new asset manager, compete against BlackRock. Let's have companies just focused on whatever their mission is, stay out of politics. That will be good for business because you're not going to fracture your customer base. It's going to be good for our democracy as well because we should have individuals are the ones should be deciding what rules they live by, not these supranational organizations or ESG promoting asset managers. And it was funny. I mean, when we originally launched, this was not even a contrarian position. This was almost like a subversive position in 2022, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, people called us everything, anti-ESG, anti-DEI, anti-woke. I mean, you name it.
Anti-everything,
Anti-everything. And I said, guys, we are just pro-American free market shareholder capitalism. That's what we are pro. We are anti-European stakeholder capitalism. We're anti the World Economic Forum. We're anti these European agendas. Yes, we are, but we are very much pro-American free market shareholder capitalism. And I mean, there were a lot of people that wouldn't even work with us. Marketing agencies wouldn't work with us. People wouldn't engage with us early on. And it's so funny now because now 3 years later, what was a very contrarian idea has become very mainstream. And the pendulum again has swung back, I think, for most of corporate America, who's now just once again able to focus on their business.
I think this is a book for every business person, even just somebody who has just watched Anheuser-Busch through the years. It's an amazing behind-the-scenes story and something that every businessman should read going forward. Last Call for Bud Light, the fall and future of America's favorite beer. Anson, thank you so much. God bless.